I will have you fired by morning. Do you know who my husband is? My name is Julian, and those were the words a woman screamed at me in the middle of a packed Saturday night service at my restaurant. All because I dared to question the legitimacy of the snarling chihuahua she was holding. She thought she had found an easy target, a manager she could bully into submission with hollow threats and feigned victimhood. She had no idea. She had just walked into carefully prepared legal trap, and that I, and my entire staff, had been waiting for someone exactly like her for a very, very long time. The trouble didn't just begin on that Saturday night. It was a storm that had been brewing for months. My restaurant, the Alchemist's Table, had carved out a niche in our bustling city. We were a haven of quiet, upscale dining, a place people came for anniversaries, proposals, and intimate celebrations, and in the past year, we had been besieged by the fake service dog epidemic. It was a constant battle. People would bring in their yapping, untrained pets, often in designer handbags, flash a fake certificate they bought online for $20, and threaten to sue us for discrimination if we questioned them. We'd had dogs urinate on our antique carpets, snap at children, and bark incessantly, shattering the very atmosphere our patrons paid a premium for. The breaking point for me had come 3 months prior. A man brought in a service poodle that proceeded to have a violent allergic reaction to a truffle dish at a nearby table, sending the entire dining room into chaos. After that night, I made a decision. I would no longer be a passive victim of this fraudulent trend. I dove headfirst into the law. I spent dozens of hours studying the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, state statutes, and local health codes. I consulted with a hospitality law expert. I learned every line, every clause, every right afforded to both disabled individuals and business owners, and I discovered the 2 magic questions, the only 2 questions the law permitted me to ask, 2 questions that were a simple, elegant key to unlocking the truth. I trained my entire front-of-house staff. We ran drills, we role-played scenarios. I armed them with knowledge and laminated cards, detailing the exact wording of the law. They were no longer to be afraid. They were to be calm, professional, and unshakable. We were ready. We were a fortress, waiting for the next siege. And on that Saturday night, our aggressor arrived. At 7:15 p.m., our busiest hour, the front door swung open, and she entered. She was a caricature of wealth and entitlement, a woman who didn't walk, but glided, as if surrounded by an invisible force field that repelled common courtesy. Tucked under her arm was a tiny, trembling chihuahua, squeezed into a pink sequin vest that read service animal. The dog's eyes were wide with terror, and it was letting out a series of high-pitched, nervous yaps that cut through the sophisticated hum of the dining room. My head hostess, Maya, intercepted her with a professional smile that didn't quite reach inside. "Good evening. Welcome to the Alchemist's Table. Do you have a reservation?" "Of course not," the woman scoffed, as if the very idea was insulting. "I need a table for 4, by the window, and you will move that rather dreary-looking couple who are currently occupying it." Maya, to her immense credit, didn't flinch. "I'm afraid that table is occupied, but I can add you to our wait list. It should be about 45 minutes. The woman's face tightened. 45 minutes? That is unacceptable. "Perhaps you don't understand this," she said, gesturing with the dog. "Is Princess, my service dog, and we require immediate seating." This was the moment. Maya caught my eye from across the room, giving me our prearranged signal. I straightened my tie, took a deep, calming breath, and began my walk from the past to the front door, my footsteps echoing on the polished hardwood floor. The battle had begun. "Good evening, madam," I said, my voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the nervous energy radiating from her and her pet. "I am Julian, the manager. I understand you require a table." Finally, she snapped. "Yes, the window table. Now, I see you have your service animal with you," I said, my gaze falling on the trembling chihuahua. It growled, a low, pathetic rumble from its tiny chest, at a family with a small child standing nearby. Per restaurant policy, and in accordance with federal law, I just have 2 brief questions for you regarding your animal." She turned her full, venomous attention to me. "Questions? There are no questions. He's a service animal. You are legally required to let us in. I could have my husband sue you for even asking me this. This is harassment." The classic opening gambit, a smokescreen of legal threats and feigned outrage. But I was prepared. "On the contrary, madam," I said, my voice still infuriatingly calm. "The law is very clear, and it is designed to protect both individuals with legitimate disabilities and business owners from fraud. I am legally permitted, and in fact required, to ask 2 questions to ensure compliance." I paused, letting the weight of my confidence settle in the air between us. "So, I will ask them now. Question 1. Is the dog a service animal that is required because of a disability?" She rolled her eyes with theatrical flair. "Obviously. What do you think this ridiculous vest is for? A fashion statement?" "Of course he is." "Very good," I said, nodding slowly. "And question 2. What specific work or task has this dog been trained to perform?" Checkmate. The silence stretched. It was a beautiful, palpable silence. She was completely blindsided. This was not in her script. I could see the frantic search in her eyes as she tried to invent a plausible-sounding lie. The gears were grinding, smoke practically pouring from her ears. Her husband and the other couple had now joined her, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and weary resignation. They had clearly been through this routine before. He can sense when I'm about to have a panic attack," she finally stammered, grabbing at the most common lie. "He's an emotional support animal. He keeps me calm." I allowed a small tight smile to touch my lips. "Thank you for clarifying," I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and produced the laminated ADA card. "However, as you can see from the official federal guidelines, the provision of emotional support, comfort, or well-being does not constitute work or a task under the law. That is the definition of an emotional support animal, which is not afforded the same public access rights as a trained service animal. Therefore, while I would be delighted to seat your party as soon as a table becomes available, the dog, per city health code, will not be permitted inside." The woman's face cycled through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, and then a deep, blotchy volcanic rage. The mask of sophisticated entitlement was gone. The true, unfiltered Karen was now in full command. "Are you calling me a liar?" she shrieked, her voice so shrill that diners in the back of the restaurant turned to stare. "This is discrimination. I have a real medical condition. You can't do this." "I am not questioning your condition in any way, madam," I replied, my voice a steady anchor in her storm of fury. "I am simply enforcing the law as it is written, based on the answer you provided. My offer to seat your party remains. The dog cannot." Her husband, a meek-looking man who seemed to have permanently shrunk from years of proximity to her, stepped forward. "Come on, Tiffany, please," he muttered, tugging on her arm. "Let's just go? This isn't worth it." "No," she ripped her arm away. "I will not be humiliated by this glorified waiter." She turned back to me, her finger jabbing at my chest. "I will have you fired by morning. Do you know who my husband is? He's a lawyer." I genuinely laughed. I couldn't help it. It was a short, sharp bark of pure amusement. "A lawyer?" I said, looking at the downtrodden man next to her. "That's wonderful. Then he should have no trouble understanding this." I handed him a printed copy of the relevant ADA statutes, which I kept ready at the host's stand for just such an occasion. He took it, his hand trembling slightly, his eyes darting everywhere but at me. "Give me your owner's name. Your corporate number," she demanded, her voice now hoarse with rage. "We are a privately owned establishment," I said calmly, reclaiming control of the situation. "I am the final authority on this property, and my final decision is that you and your party are welcome, but the dog is not." What happened next was the predictable escalation of an entitled person who has been denied their way. The Chihuahua, agitated by her screaming and the tense energy, wriggled out of her arms, hit the floor, and darted towards the nearest person, a gentleman who was waiting patiently for his table. It nipped him sharply on the ankle. It wasn't a serious bite, but it broke the skin, and the man cried out in surprise and pain. And that was it. The game was over. She had lost control of her animal in a public space, and it had resulted in an injury to a patron. The situation had now moved from a civil disagreement to a criminal matter. My training kicked in. I immediately shifted from manager to incident commander. My voice became louder, more authoritative. Maya, I commanded, call 999 immediately. Inform them we have an aggressive, uncontrolled animal that has just bitten a guest. Give them our address and tell them the situation is escalating. To another staff member, I said, David, please get our first aid kit and assist the gentleman who was bitten. Get his name and contact information, and please, comp his party's entire meal tonight. Tiffany, the Karen, was now in a full-blown meltdown. She was screaming obscenities, a torrent of abuse directed at me, at her husband, at the man who was bitten. Her husband was trying to grab her and the dog, attempting to flee the scene, but I positioned myself between them and the door. Sir, I said to him, my voice dangerously low. You are not leaving. The police have been called. Fleeing the scene of an animal attack is a crime. The restaurant was in chaos. Guests were standing up, their phones out, likely recording the entire spectacular public freakout. It was the exact scene of humiliation and disruption she had intended to create if I hadn't complied with her demands. Now, it was her own personal circus of consequences. The police arrived in what felt like seconds. Two calm professional officers who radiated an aura of being completely unimpressed by wealthy people behaving badly. I met them at the door and gave them a concise, factual, and emotionless account of the entire incident. I started with her illegal demand for a table, her fraudulent claim of a service animal, my two legally permissible questions, her incriminating answer, my lawful refusal to allow the dog entry, and finally, the dog biting another patron. I presented them with my laminated ADA card, the contact information of the victim, and pointed out at least 3 security cameras that had captured the entire event. The husband, the supposed lawyer, immediately went into damage control mode. Officers, thank you for coming. But this is a huge misunderstanding, he began, trying to project an authority he clearly didn't possess. My wife is just very stressed, and this manager has been incredibly aggressive. The senior officer, a woman with a gaze that could cut glass, held up a hand, silencing him instantly. She turned to me. So, to be clear, you asked the 2 federally approved questions. She failed to provide a valid trained task, and you refused entry to the dog, not the person? That is correct, officer. I confirmed. She nodded, then turned her unwavering gaze to Tiffany. Ma'am, do you have vaccination and registration papers for this animal? Tiffany's face, already blotchy with rage, now turned pale with a new kind of fear. The fear of actual, real-world consequences. Of course, she didn't have the papers. They're at home. In my other purse, she lied, her voice now a pathetic whimper. Okay, ma'am, the officer said patiently, though her eyes were anything but. Well, because your animal has bitten someone, we are required by city ordinance to take the animal for a mandatory quarantine period and to file a report. And because you have knowingly and fraudulently misrepresented a pet as a service animal in a public establishment, which is a Class B misdemeanor in this state, you will be receiving a citation for that as well. I'll need to see your ID. She looked like she had been slapped. The other officer was taking a statement from the man who had been bitten, who was, quite rightly, very keen on pressing charges for the assault. Her husband was pale, whispering frantically to her about legal fees and court dates. The fantasy of her untouchable, entitled life was dissolving around her in real time. But my revenge wasn't quite complete. The public humiliation was exquisite, the fines and the police report were even better, but I wanted to make sure she could never, ever bring her toxic brand of entitlement into my establishment again. While the police were writing their report, I went to my office and printed out a formal, legally binding trespass notice, complete with her name and the date. I walked back out and handed it to the senior officer. "Officer, for your report," I said clearly, so Tiffany could hear every word. "The restaurant is also issuing a lifetime ban. This is a formal trespass notice. If she or any member of her party ever sets foot on this property again, I will have them arrested for criminal trespassing." The officer nodded, took the notice, and handed it to a completely defeated Tiffany. She looked at the paper, then at me, her eyes promising a murder she knew she could never commit. She was broken, beaten by the law she thought was her shield. Her own arrogance had led her step by step into a trap of her own making, and I had simply held the door open for her. The police escorted a now sobbing Tiffany and her party out of the restaurant. The sight of her being led away, her tiny sequined dog being carried by an officer in an animal control carrier, was a moment of pure, unadulterated catharsis for my entire staff. As the door closed behind them, the dining room, which had been dead silent, erupted in a spontaneous round of applause. Several guests came up to me to thank me for how I handled the situation. One man, a veteran with a legitimate service dog, shook my hand with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "People like her make life so much harder for people like me." The fallout for her was, from what I gathered, significant. I saw her name in the local police blotter the following week for the fraudulent service animal charge. The man who was bitten filed a civil suit, and through the restaurant grapevine, I heard her husband's law firm settled it quickly and quietly for a significant sum to avoid further public embarrassment. Her name and the story of her epic meltdown became a cautionary tale in the local community, a meme among the city's service industry workers. My restaurant, on the other hand, flourished. The story, likely spread by the dozens of patrons who had recorded it, went locally viral. We received a flood of support from the community. Our staff, feeling protected and empowered, had a new sense of pride and security. And I had a new sense of peace, knowing that I had not only protected my business, but had also struck a small blow for every waiter, hostess, and manager who has ever had to endure the abuse of an entitled Karen. This experience reinforced a core belief of mine. The law and the rules are not just for the people who are willing to follow them. They are the most powerful weapons you can use against those who believe the rules don't apply to them. Know the rules. Document everything. Stay calm. And let their own arrogance, their own rage, and their own sense of entitlement be the architects of their spectacular public downfall. That's my story of how a quiet Saturday night turned into a masterclass in Karen revenge. Now I want to hear your stories. What's the most outrageous act of public entitlement you've ever witnessed? What happened to the Karen in your story? Share your experiences in the comments. Let's expose these stories and show that for every moment of entitlement, there can be a moment of perfect, satisfying justice.